Hello and welcome to another session of Advocate with Abkarian. We have a very good show today. We have with us a very important person that has accepted our invitation to come to our show. Well, we have with us Chief Poviliatis from City of Glendale. Chief, thank you for accepting our invitation and coming in today.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Albert. It's always good to visit with you and your audience.
Thank you so much. Chief, I was going to ask you a few questions. As you know, that it would be mainly focused on coronavirus and the response. How were you prepared for the coronavirus and what came, which no one was really prepared for?
I mean, in reality, when you think about it, and having been around the city for a little while, we'd actually done some preparation for potential pandemics, back in the early 2000s. So the transition into dealing with one that is actually coming through, although unusual, was not a completely foreign concept. Though, as I tell everybody, nobody has ever done this before. The only person that I know who has any knowledge of a pandemic is 91 years old, because we're going back to actually the Spanish flu. And I think that person told me they lost a sister in that. So, this is something new for our community. It is something new for all of us. The one thing I will say is, we're all going to get through this together, and the community has really put together. But, that did, make some operational changes for the police department as we start to understand more about how the coronavirus is transmitted. You will have seen some operational changes. We are taking some reports by telephone. So we're not going in there. We are asking people sometimes to step outside of their houses so that we can conduct the investigation outside. And even our officers are practicing social distancing when possible. With a police department, it is not always possible to be completely socially distant because there are, still some people who are committing crimes, and we are still arresting people.
And that's my next question. Police department is fully operational. Some people might think that this is the best time to take advantage of the situation and to commit some crimes because the police is too busy. But my understanding is that the police department is fully operational and people will get arrested if something happens.
Yes, the police department is fully operational. In fact, there are actually a few more people on the streets because although we did not cancel anybody's vacation, we stopped approving new leaves once the emergency orders went into place. So the front lines of the police department are completely fully staffed. Some of the things you will notice in the beginning, we had a lot of lines at grocery stores where people were going to do some shopping. I think it's still hard to find toilet paper in a grocery store, even though there really isn't a shortage if everybody just buys what they need. But in order just to keep people calm, one of the things the police department did was increase its level of visibility. So you will, even to this day, see increased patrols around stores and essential businesses. And then with the orders to close down non-essential business, police officers are also keeping an extra eye on those businesses that had to close because of the pandemic and the order to close all non-essential businesses.
I do have a face mask, Chief. I'm just not wearing it during the interview, so don't come and arrest me. But what is the requirement for the face mask, and how is the police operating those businesses that are not non-compliant?
Your question is actually very timely because the rules actually just changed last night again with some direction from the city council. So as of today, anybody who is actually leaving their property and is in a public space needs to wear a face covering. And so I'm being careful with the terminology as I try to adjust here, because face covering does not necessarily mean mask. A lot of times for those of us on the front lines for the medical, a mask is either a respirator or an N95 or a surgical mask. So in Glendale, the current rules are that if you are in a public place, you need to wear a face covering. That face covering can be cloth, it could be a scarf, it can be a bandana, it can be something that you can buy commercially. It can also be something that you make at home. And I know there are several YouTube videos out there that if you need to make one on how to do that. From the police department's perspective, where we've been with with all of this along is we've done a lot of education. And so we've transitioned to education to encouragement. So you will have police officers asking people to make sure they are in compliance with that. We're also trying to remind people, this is a different time. So we're trying to remind people of what the appropriate behavior is. This is not the time to go visiting people. This is not the time to be hanging out with your friends in a parking lot. If you're going to a park with members of your household, that's fine, but this is not the time to be gathering. We are all trying to slow the spread of, this terrible virus within our community. And so we're here to be part of a reminder of that. And so an officer may ask you to move on, or remind you about social distancing, or remind you to put a face covering on. And as I said, the vast majority of people are complying. I will say technically that if people don't comply, the emergencies are enforceable under law. It is a misdemeanor with up to $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail.
Well, really stiff. Maybe, let me ask you a question now that you brought that up. Does that mean that if you're going jogging or walking, you need to have some kind of face covering as well?
That is correct. In Glendale, as of this morning, you would need to be wearing a face covering if you were going jogging or walking.
Okay, so that was one question that a lot of people were asking. It's confusing time, confusing rules, confusing. I'm assuming that the police will be lenient on that initially, just kind of making recommendations to people, and then they're going to enforce it maybe in a few days, I'm hoping.
Yeah, the vast majority of this community, I got to tell you, I'm impressed with Glendale. I always have been impressed with Glendale. With the safer at home ordinance, people actually have been staying home. You can tell that by the traffic. You do see occasional people walking. Most of the people that I've seen out walking, or even if I've gone for a walk in the community, everybody's very careful to make sure that there's 6 feet of distance when you're passing somebody or going by somebody. People have been very, very, very careful in that. And so, yes, you will see police officers with face coverings on. It will vary. You may not always see that. You have to realize that with the profession that we're in, we need different equipment at different times. And the face coverings are designed to it protects you from me if I'm here more than it protects me from you. But we do have some of the N95 respirators, because some of the things that we have to do is go into areas where there are higher risk. And so we have different personal protective gear that we expect police officers to wear. So you may not always see a face covering on a police officer. It will depend on what they're doing, where they're doing, and how they're assessing a particular situation.
Chief, with all the face coverings, are you concerned that someone would use that to basically to their advantage? A criminal would use that to their advantage of going to a store and trying to rob or do something else?
Our community has actually been very good, and I know there are some people out there that would mean to do harm. That is one of the reasons that we're in a very high visibility mode. I will also tell you, police officers are police officers at heart, and they take the protection of our community very seriously. And so while we're talking about COVID-19 or coronavirus as the key topic here, and having compliance with the emergency orders to slow that spread, police officers are still out doing police work. A couple of the reminders that I've given people is, one is you should only be leaving the house to do essential business. So if you need to go to the store to pick up some food, you need to go to a doctor's appointment, those essential things you need to take care of in life, you can do that. We just ask that you minimize your time outside and then return home. Please be mindful that people do have the ability to go take a walk around the neighborhood and do. So if you are driving to those essential activities, we ask that you drive carefully. Just because there is not as much traffic on the roadways as there has been, when we were more normal times, it's also important that you realize there are other people that are sharing those roadways. It's not just cars. And when you see that the roadway is wide open, we are still enforcing the speed limits. And a couple people have found out the hard way, where we had a couple of people that were basically engaging in a speed contest on one of our roadways and driving at high rates of speed. We are stopping them. We are making arrests for reckless driving or speed contests, and we are impounding the vehicles.
You always end your statement with a question that I'm going to ask next, which is, it seems like I've actually tailored it. But that's one thing I wanted to ask you, traffic tickets and parking tickets. How is the police department handling those? I think you answered one of them, but how about the parking tickets?
So yeah, I'll do those in reverse. So with parking citations, we're trying to make it easy for people to stay at home. So the what we sometimes call the street sweeping enforcements, the parking restrictions in a neighborhood that are designed to facilitate street sweeping are not being enforced. So you may leave your car, on the street during that time frame. We want people to be able to stay in, and we don't want you to have to go out looking for a parking space. So we are not doing that. All of our parking meters, those spaces, they are free for the first 20 minutes. That is to be able to facilitate people being able to go pick up food from restaurants, since everything has to be takeout at this point. We're trying to accommodate that, and we're trying to use some reason in there. The other rules and regulations with regard to parking are being enforced. So, for example, time zones that are a lot of times in front of businesses to allow customer turnover, and for allowing people to get in and out of the business quickly, those are being enforced. So, hypothetically, a cleaners or a restaurant, you don't want the cars parked all in front, all at the same time and occupying those spaces. We want people to be able to go out if they've ordered takeout food or need to pick up their cleaning, to be able to get to that business, pick up their stuff, minimize their time in contact with people in that business, and take it, and then head back home.
Okay, great. That's good to know. I wanted to ask you about what is the, now that you have safe distance, how is the communication going between you, the city council, the city manager, and all of the different departments in the city?
It's a very different time. For a person who grew up where, most of the meetings that we do are in person, I always subscribe to the theory of management by walking around. And if you're having a meeting, why aren't you having it in somebody else's office instead of your office? This is a very big cultural change for me, because it's changed a lot. So just as we're doing this interview in sort of a non-traditional format, I've learned to use Zoom. I've learned to use WebEx, or I'm learning to use both of those platforms. A lot of the meetings that we're doing in the city are now done by conference bridges. So they are conference calls or WebEx or video conferencing, whichever is most appropriate to that. So that allows for the communication between department heads, communications within the department, communications with the city council to go on. It's just a little bit of a different format and adjustment for us all.
Okay, why don't we do this, Chief? We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back, and I have a number of other questions that I want to ask you. So let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to another edition of the Advocate, and we were on a break. We're still continuing to talk with Chief Poviliatis, Glendale, Chief Police in the City of Glendale, and we are asking questions that the viewers have asked us previously. Chief, one of the questions that was asked was, what is the coordination between you and the federal bureaus with the police department, and what kind of connection do you have with them?
In terms of the COVID-19
Yes.
issue, we've declared an emergency, and we've been through emergencies before. I'm old enough to remember the 1994 earthquake, although I was a much younger police officer at the time. We've been through fires. We've been through some mudslides and stuff after fires on a more minor basis. So this is not necessarily unusual. And so our Emergency Operations Center has come into play, and the County Emergency Operations Center has also come into play. So that is the overarching organization that allows us to coordinate resources. And if we need resources, to be able to ask for them. Above the county, then you get into a region, and then you get into a statewide system, and then that reaches into the federal system. With the declarations at the federal, state, and local level, under the Stafford Act, those declarations of emergency, we also go into starting to be able to track our expenses related to this, so that we can ultimately seek federal reimbursement for some of those expenses. So much like before, the communication is there. There is enhanced levels of communication within the county. So I know all of the fire chiefs talk on a regular basis. I know the LA County Police Chiefs are talking, we're talking now twice a week, where we used to meet once a month, just to make sure that we can share experiences, we can talk about each other's communities, and coordinate resources.
Uh, talking about the information having to do with your staff, and you said you have to change. And how do you protect the officers that are in the front line going to an area where they have no idea if somebody has the virus or not? And you know, hats off to all of the first responders, and with you, especially for the Glendale Police, one of the best police departments anywhere. How do you protect the officers on a daily basis?
So I'll thank you for the compliment on behalf of the men and women of the Glendale Police Department, because I'd agree. I think it's one of the best police departments everywhere, pound for pound, person for person. And I think the Glendale community, because that relationship between the community and really its police department is what makes a community safe and successful. So I had already mentioned a little earlier that we talked about some of our reports we are taking by telephone. You will notice that if you call the police department, they're going to ask you a series of different questions related to whether you have a cough, a fever, or any of the signs or symptoms of the COVID-19 system. We are using that information to let our officers know so that when they're responding, if they need to use their personal protective equipment, they can do that. Again, we are asking for the community's cooperation, and they have been absolutely tremendous in working with us in this. We may ask you, if we're doing an investigation, to please step outside of the house, and we're trying to maintain our social distancing from members of our community as you are from us. We're all working within the same framework. As I said, we have, all of our police cars have been stocked up with extra gear. The officers do have masks. I will also add that if an officer asks you to place a face covering on, we would ask that you comply with that request. This is, again, for the protection of all of us involved in being able to maintain the safety of our community, and to make sure that our interactions are as safe as possible.
Going into businesses, if businesses do not comply, if they're non-essential businesses and they just stay open, you're talking about mechanic shops and gift shops and hairdressers. If they don't comply, they will be given a fine. Is that true?
Yes, they can be. So the way that we've approached this in Glendale is actually, this is very much a cooperative effort. The community development department, neighborhood services, is actually responding to most of those issues during business hours, and their inspectors are checking and asking non-essential businesses to close and issuing the appropriate paperwork. The police department is also engaged in that, especially in the after hours. If you are operating a business, a non-essential business, it is a violation of the emergency orders. Again, it is that misdemeanor we talked about beforehand. So far, I've got to tell you, most people, when we've walked in, whether it's the police department or whether it's part of neighborhood services or community development staff, and explain to somebody, hey, this is a non-essential business, they have closed. If we've had to go in and talk to managers about social distancing, the managers of the various establishments have taken it to heart and made the adjustments there. I got to tell you, this is a very good community, and the vast majority of people have complied with it. I think they all get the seriousness of it. And again, a lot of what we're doing is education, because this is very, very different for all of us. It's very different for, how I'm conducting business for the police department and myself. It's very different for members of our community. It's very different for all of the retailers. And so everybody's adapting, and as I said, for the most part, everybody's been very, very cooperative.
Based on the order from the county, this stay-at-home will continue until May 15th. Is that correct?
That's correct. They did extend the orders to go through May 15th.
And so I just wanted to clarify that. So a couple of things that we want to clarify. May 15th is the stay-at-home until May 15th, unless if it's extended. And two is, as of today, we have face coverings, even if you're walking or jogging or just around your house. If you're outside of your premises, you need to wear this, correct?
That's correct. There's two things at play. So the county health order has been extended, and Glendale has paralleled its extensions to do that. And this is where the rules for the county and the rules for the city of Glendale will differentiate slightly here. So the county health orders, and they also carry that force of law. So that prohibits gatherings, outside your household. So again, we're trying to get that educational piece out, that this is not the time to be visiting friends or relatives. The idea here is to have that social distancing so that the virus does not spread. Now, for the city of Glendale, whereas the county rules that came into effect today require that anytime you go into an essential business, you must wear a face covering. That is countywide. Glendale specifically requires that if you are off your property, outside your dwelling unit, if you will, you do need to wear a face covering. The exception would be is if you are driving in your own car, you do not need to wear it while you are driving in the car. But if you are on the sidewalk, jogging, walking, you do need to wear a face covering.
Okay.
And obviously, if you're in an essential business, you do need to wear a face covering.
Of course. A quick note. Take the next couple of minutes and talk to the people in the city of Glendale and tell them what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, just like if you're talking to all the audience members.
The safer at home orders were issued for a very particular reason. We talk about flattening the curve. The whole idea is to keep our community safe. And the actions that each individual takes, each and every one of us takes, is going to make a difference. Probably one of the things that got my attention as the information becomes more known about this particular virus is that a person who has no symptoms could be transmitting or could be contagious 48 hours before they feel any symptoms. And so, when we look at that from a community standpoint, that means anybody, if you had symptoms today, anybody that you have been in close contact with for the last 48 hours would have to be quarantined and has potentially been exposed to the virus. The whole goal of this is to flatten the curve so that we don't overload the medical service, is to flatten that curve so that our friends, our neighbors, our family members, our kids, our grandparents stay safe. So I'm asking you, when we say safe at home, if you don't need to go out, please stay home. If you need to go out to do an essential activity, please wear the face covering and please maintain your social distancing. Understand that a face covering is not a substitute for social distancing. You do not want to get closer to other people just because you're wearing a face covering. It is not going to protect you in the way that, in any way. So you still want to maintain that social distancing. When you're out, please try to minimize your amount of time that is out. Please make sure it is only for those essential businesses. Please limit or don't gather at all in terms of this is not the time to be grouping with friends, because if we do this right, that curve will flatten and that will allow the governor, the city council, the board of supervisors to start looking at how we can open it up. And it ultimately means that our friends, our neighbors, our family members are safer. The police department is here to help you. We are out there. We are highly visible. We are here to make sure the community is safe. I know a lot of people are home. If you see something that does not belong in your neighborhood that is of criminal activity, please let us know. We are fully staffed and we are responding to those calls. But you can help us by making those phone calls, but you can also help us by maintaining the social distancing and following the emergency orders.
Chief, I really appreciate taking the time in this difficult time and meeting with me. I know how crazy things are right now, but the fact that you take the time and you met with us and to inform the viewers as to what we need to do and what we shouldn't do in the community is much appreciated. Thank you for coming in, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Albert, thank you very much for having me on your program.
We'll be back very soon with some more information from someone from the city, hopefully the city manager, and we'll be talking to you soon.